Welcome back to Faerun FM, the Sword Coast's favorite radio station. I am, of course, your host, Rash Limpdick, and let's get right into the news. There's an existential threat that the liberal media of Neverwinter doesn't want you to know. And I'm not talking about a gate to hell opening up and swallowing a city whole. I'm not talking about giants walking the land and destroying small villages that nobody cares about. I'm talking about a much more insidious threat. A threat that comes from the inside. A threat that might be your neighbor saying hello, or even worse, your kid's school teacher. I'm talking about half-elves. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Rash, my coworker's a half-elf and he's a great guy. Or my favorite bartender's a half-elf and she pours me great pints. And that's the problem, because they come off as innocent, upstanding members of our community when they're actually the greatest threat to the human race that we know. Why? Well, let's go back to basics. How does a half-elf get created? Quite simply, because a human man goes and meets an elf woman, they do the deed, the elf woman gets pregnant, and then they birth a half-elf. Now, the first part of this problem makes sense. Elf women are incredibly sexy. Before I met my current wife, and while I was married to my first wife, I used to make the yearly pilgrimage to Everesca and have myself a good time. But the thing is, I would pull out. And when I didn't, I made sure to make another trip 3 months later and make sure that the woman in question had a trip down the stairs, if you know what I mean. But what we're seeing now with young men going on holiday to Everesca or even intermingling with the elven women in Waterdeep and Neverwinter, they're not pulling out. And they're not getting rid of the baby. Instead, they're settling down, having relationships with these women, and then birthing half-elves. And while human men are going out and having these relationships with elven women, human women are being left behind, growing old without bearing fruit, without continuing the next generations. Or even worse, they're meeting orc men and having half-orcs, which is even worse. All of this results in fewer and fewer pure-blooded humans being born, which is an absolute crisis for any and all patriotic Sword Coast residents. Why is that a problem? Well, because as we all know, elves are homosexuals. And what's going to happen is we have all of these half-elves, and they're going to breed with more elves to make them quarter humans. And then they breed with elves, and they become eighth humans, and on and on and on until the human DNA is almost eradicated. Then we only have elves, who, as we mentioned, are all homosexuals and won't reproduce. This will lead to the downfall of all living mortal races in Faerun. Now you might be wondering, Rash, who would want such a thing? I mean, don't we want mortals to continue? We're all mortal, I'm mortal, you're mortal, most likely. Well, the answer is simple. Hillary Rodham Clinton, otherwise known as Tiamat. We all know Tiamat wants to extinguish the mortal races of Faerun. She hates humans more than anyone else, and she wants our way of life destroyed. She's tried breaking out of the Nine Hells and failed. She's tried unleashing all sorts of apocalypse upon the mortal races of Faerun and failed. So now she needs to do something much more insidious. She needs to destroy us from the inside. And this is how she's doing it. This isn't some kind of joke. This isn't some sort of prank for a day of frivolity and jokes. This is real life. And unless you contribute to the pure blood human project, Tiamat, or should I say Hillary Rodham Clinton, is going to get away with it and replace all of humankind with a bunch of gay elves. Do you want your ancestors to be gay elves? I didn't think so. Contribute to the fund today. Now, here's 48 hours of Jeremy's soul. And while human men are going out and having these relationships with elven women, why is it a problem? Well, because as we all know, elves are actually homosexuals. Why is this a problem? Well, because as we all know, elves are homosexuals. It is so hard to say that with a straight face. Well, the answer is simple. Hillary Rodham Clinton.